Well, I guess you made it to episode 2, and this is going to be a little bit about my background, how I came up, how I got to where I am today, and the journey that I've taken, and it all started right in Elamville. And I described Elamville a little bit in the last episode, and I'm not going to go into it a whole lot this time. It'll just kind of pop up here and there because it's, as we all, when we grow up somewhere, that it becomes part of us. And Elamville will always be a part of me. But as I said in the first episode, I was born in 1976. And as I tell all of my classes, that's a special year because it was the bicentennial. And by some stroke of luck, if I can live to be 100 and about 2 months old, I will have seen our 200th birthday as a country, hopefully, and our 300th birthday as a country. And that'll be something special. But right now, we're going into America's 250th year and my 50th year on this earth. And it all started in Elamville, Alabama. And if you'd like to know exactly where Elamville is at or have an idea of what Elamville was back in the early 80s, you can go back to episode 1 to kind of catch up. But I was born in 1976. And at the time, my father was a full-time farmer, a full-time peanut farmer. We had peanuts, we had cows, we had hogs, we had corn. And unlike a lot of farmers in this area, I don't remember us ever dealing with cotton. But like I said, I grew up on a farm, and that is my earliest memories. I can remember, going to fields with my dad, and I remember as my dad would bottom plow, sometimes I would play in the furrow until he started coming back toward me, and I'd have to move. But I had all kind of little toy tractors, especially Ford tractors, because right down the road here from Elamville, there was a little Ford tractor dealership in the small town of Ariton. And that's Ariton, Ariton. There is no G. But for some reason, some of the people around here always call it Arrington. It is not Arrington. It is Ariton. And I think it was called Fleming Ford. And it's right there where modern day Ariton, there's a convenience store called the Hobo Pantry. But as I remember it in the early 80s, that's where Fleming Ford was at. And I'd go there all the time with my grandfather. And he would, I don't think every time, but I would get tractors, toy tractors. They had them, the little scale Ertl models, like 1/16, 1/8, 132. And I would get one. And I had a bunch of them. I had little trucks, and I would go out in the yard in my grandparents' place and have me a little barn set up, and I'd farm. And if I couldn't go outside, I'd farm inside. Each room with a different field. I'd emulate my father as he farmed. And I remember growing up, and I remember summertime more than anything else, because I guess that's when everybody was home, and that's when farming really took root, no pun intended, in the summertime. And I remember in the summertime growing up, all of my cousins coming over, and it seemed like every day they would meet up at my grandmother's house. And I was always the youngest, and I usually got picked on here and there, but you kind of get the idea of your typical Southern upbringing in the summertime back in the early 80s, late 70s. And it was all about family. And I had a lot of cousins around the area. Like I said, most everybody in Elamville was related. And the cousins would always show up in the summertime, and kids that were related to people in Elamville would show up in the summertime. But that was my life growing up, life on a farm. I remember in the barn, we'd have square bales of hay stacked up in there, and we'd play King of the Mountain sometimes. And I remember getting a BB gun as a child. I always wanted a BB gun. And finally, one day I was in my grandmother's house, and my grandfather come home. He died when I was 8 in 1984, so I was 8 years old or younger, I can't remember. But he came home and he had something it was long, and, like, I could tell it was something big he had in his hands, and it was wrapped up in paper. And he had been up to the hardware store, Robert's Hardware in Clio, and bought a lever action BB gun, a Daisy BB gun, and I unwrapped it, and that was one of the proudest moments of my life. And I'm gonna tell you a little story about a turkey. My grandmother had chickens, my grandmother had turkeys in the yard, and there was this great big gobbler that she had, and he was mean as a snake. We had a three-wheeler, a Honda 110, and I don't wanna go off on a tangent, but three-wheelers were outlawed for a reason. They were dangerous, but we had a three-wheeler that we got for Christmas one year, and as I would ride by the turkey or the pen out there, he would chase me. I'd go out in the yard, he would chase me. I'd never known turkeys to be mean, but this turkey was absolutely mean. I don't know if he was possessed by the devil or what, but he was mean and he would chase me. And I got that BB gun in my hands and my first thought turned to that turkey. And I walked outside, put BBs in it, and they had the little door up top on the barrel where you poured your BBs from a little cylindrical tube down in there, and I poured all my BBs in there and I cocked it. And that turkey just so happened to be shut up in the pen that day. So I walked up there, and the first thing I did with my brand new BB gun is I put it right up to that turkey's neck. And I was thinking, all these times you have chased me, now I get my revenge. And I shot that turkey right in the neck. Didn't kill it. Didn't even hardly hurt it. Them little Daisy BB guns, they didn't have to pack much of a punch. But I remember my grandmother getting my BB gun. And I don't know if she whipped me. She didn't whip me very much because of my granddaddy. But she took my BB gun away from me. I had it all of about 15 minutes before I got it back. It was probably a week later. But those are the kind of stories I remember growing up. And they mostly relate around my grandparents because they live right next door to us. And I pretty much stayed up there at their house a lot of the times. And I remember my grandfather eating breakfast one morning, and we used to have hogs, me and him, and this will be a story all on its own, but he'd go to the hog sales, auctions around the area. And we had bought a couple pigs the day before. Let me tell you a little bit about the pig auctions we used to go to. I was a little bit of a novelty at especially the Brundage auction. I think it was called C.L. Chambers and Son, and the Louisville auction. I don't know if it had a name other than the Louisville auction. But we had been to one of the other, probably Brundage, and bought a couple of pigs, and my granddaddy brought them home, and we wormed them real good. And he was eating breakfast one morning, and let me get back a little bit to why I was a novelty before I tell the story about the pigs. And you're going to learn I ramble a little bit, so you just have to stick with me. But I was probably one of the youngest people to go to every sale every day. I don't remember a whole lot of children being around. Yeah, I remember just being there with my grandfather. And they used to have right beside the arena where they would run the pigs in and people would bid on them. They had wooden chairs set up. And that was for the bigwigs. That was for the buyers. The people that would come in and buy, a lot of the hogs and take them to feed them out or wherever, ship them off to the Midwest, to the corn lots, whatever. But those chairs were reserved for the buyers. And I got to sit down there for some reason. And my granddaddy would sit right behind me. And they run a pig into the auction area. And I would look back at him, and he would either nod yes or shake his head no. If he nodded yes, I could put my little finger in the air, and I would start bidding with those buyers beside me. And most of the time, they probably let me win because we bought a lot of hogs. And that's some of my earliest memories was at that hog sale and climbing up to the top because it was like a stadium seating environment, and you could walk up to the top of it. I remember you get to the very top and you could touch the ceiling. But I would sit there and I'd buy hogs with him, and we bought 2 one day and came back in, and like I said, we wormed them real good, and that's like little pellets you'd feed them for worming. We fed them a whole bag. And the next morning I it was breakfast time because I was up here and he was in here and he was eating breakfast. And then I said, I want to go down to the hog pen. He told me to go ahead and he'd be down there in a minute. So I went down there and I looked in the pen and they were laying there. And usually hogs don't lay around too often. You picture hogs laying in slop and all that, but usually, when they're new to a place, they don't lay down. They're looking for a way out. And I climbed over the fence. I don't know if it was a wooden fence or like them little wire panels, but it's probably a wire panel. But I climbed over it and I kicked it. It didn't move. And I kicked the other one. It didn't move. And I went down. I come back up to the house. I remember climbing up to the back door and opening it because the back door opened right to the kitchen. And I called him Papa. I said, Papa. I said, those pigs are down there laying down. They ain't moving. And he stormed out and went down there. And I remember him putting his hand on the fence and standing there. Well, dang. He didn't say dang. I'm trying to keep this as clean as possible. He said, I have killed those what hogs. We fed them too much wormer. And most of my memories of childhood revolve around that man. Now, people say he was kind of mean. I don't remember it. He was never mean to me. They say he was an alcoholic. I don't remember him drinking. But maybe that's just, seeing your grandfather through your eyes. And at that time, he was godlike to me. And just thinking back, I can still see his face. I can barely hear his voice. But it was always a special relationship with me and him. I can remember sitting in his lap, driving his old silver 1978 F-150 that was just beat up. We would drive it, or he would let me drive steering down the highway. And I remember he died when I was 8 years old. And there I am sitting in his lap, and I'm steering, not in the seatbelt or anything else. And if I wasn't sitting in his lap driving, I was standing right next to him. So that's the kind of upbringing I had. And I look back on it fondly. And as we go along in this podcast and this little journal that I'm doing, that I'll remember more and I'll probably speak more of my grandparents as we go along. But that's one of the first stories I can remember of him. And my grandmother, as I've said in that first episode, she lived to be 96 years old, born in 1913. And she told stories all the time, and I'll probably recite a few here and there. And like I said, we're just getting started in this podcast. So I want to kind of keep this one on my background a little bit and give you an idea where I came from to get where I am today. While I'm speaking of my grandfather, I just thought about going ahead and getting this out of the way and talking about the day he passed away. Because I don't have a whole lot of stories about him. But I remember very vividly the day that he died. To start the story off, there was an old man, and I think he had Alzheimer's. I'm not sure. We're looking back in 1984. And as I'm talking to you now, it's December of 2025, so a long time ago. There was an old man that lived maybe 2 miles away from my granddaddy, and like I said, he had Alzheimer's and he had wandered away. And this was in November of 1984, so it was kind of cool. He had wandered away and he had been gone, I guess, a day or two. And I remember my grandfather had just gotten out of the hospital. He'd had a heart attack. And we were standing in the front yard, and it was me, him, and my grandmother. And he wanted to go try to get some help and try to go look for this man that had disappeared. And he wasn't in shape. He wasn't able to go. And my grandmother knew it. She was begging him not to get in the truck, not to leave. He looked at me. I remember vividly. I remember his eyes when he looked at me. And he said, and like I said, everybody called me John because that was my middle name. He said, John, don't you want a hamburger? Don't you want your grandmama to go in there and fix you one? And I was like a child, I was, sure, I want a hamburger. But my grandmother knew what he was doing. He was trying to get her in the house. And as soon as she got in the house, he left. And I went on out and had a little patch between our house and my grandparents' house. I was out in the patch doing something. I can't remember if I was playing with a football or playing on some of the farm equipment that was parked there. But I remember my aunt, her name was Pearl, Aunt Pearl. Her car come flying in the yard and she jumps out and I could hear her saying something. And I kind of heard what she said, but I don't remember hearing the words. But she was yelling that our grandfather had died and yelling. And my sister comes out of the sliding glass door in the back of her house and she's squalling, crying. And my 8-year-old mind, I couldn't understand why. And I was thinking something happened to my parents or something. And then I went up there and I don't know how we got up there, but my grandfather was driving down the road. And I guess he felt the heart attack coming on because he turned around and he made it a little piece and kind of ran off the road and ran in a ditch. And he passed away right there beside the road in his pickup truck, 1978 Ford F-150. And I remember we were up there. I don't remember how we got up there. I remember going up there and my grandmother, there was a house for the carport right there. And she was inside the carport and she was just wanting to get to him because she thought if she could, I don't know what she was thinking, but wanted to raise his arm up or something. And maybe she said she could revive him. I just remember the sadness. I remember just sadness is the best way to put it. And he died in November of 1984. I remember the funeral. It was in the Methodist church here in Eagle Mill. And it was an old building, probably over 100 years old. White church, tall white steeple, had a bell in there and the rope hanging down. And I remember walking up to the casket and seeing my grandfather in the casket. I remember taking my finger and touching his hand. And my grandmother looked at me, or she may have told me later, but in my mind, I can see her looking at me saying, if you touch someone, you'll never dream about them. And that's kind of stuck with me for the last 41 years. I don't remember ever dreaming about my grandfather. I've had dreams about my grandmother. She lived a long time after that. But I don't remember dreaming about him. I don't think I ever have. And there's very few pictures of him, and they're not good pictures. But I do have his last driver's license. And I have it in a picture frame behind me here in my office. And it looks just like I remember him. I mean, with like the shirt with the top button undone, and he had a flannel jacket that he always wore. And I remember those last days, or that last day of his life. I guess my other grandfather had died in 1981, but I was 5. I don't really remember it. I don't think it affected me as much as when he died, because we were buddies. Now, that'll pretty much wrap up this episode. Like I said, if you're interested, come on back for episode 3. I didn't get as far as I wanted to because I started thinking about my grandfather and I go off on tangents, but we'll see what we cook up for episode 3. And like before, I appreciate it. And if you feel so inclined to check out my website, pelhamq.com, go on over there, get a hold of me in some kind of way. I'd love to hear from you. But until then, I'll talk to you later.